Was talking to a guy in a cafe the other day who, after 20 years, had got his dream job as an engineer. He was designing a VTOL electric flight machine that could take medics to within 50 miles of a hospital and give emergency care within 10 minutes of a 911 call. And this is, of course, incredibly exciting, right? We've got innovations in batteries, we've got innovation in the idea, we've got an increase in speed, a significant increase of speed, maybe even, five times faster, etc. And he asked me what my ideal job would be. And it would be as a cultural designer. Now, how do you arrive at something like that? Well, I did a search on Amazon for books about cultural design. And I think there was one book, and it was not very, I ordered it, and it was not very good either in format. It had like a 9-point font, so it was actually literally very hard to read. And partly because of that, but also the amount of citations and references to other work, I did not come away knowing how to design a culture. Now, when we think about what we want to do with our life, what kind of career we want to have, how do you come up with an answer to that question? Well, one approach is to find the common ground of a number of different values or approaches. And a good approach to start is what skill, if learned well, if competently learned, could provide the most value to humanity over the next 100 years, right? Where most of us won't be around more than 100 years. At least that's been the consensus to date. And what better thing to do than something that is maximally useful for the species, for life, for evolution, right? Because we could, of course, pick an activity that is highly destructive for humanity and highly destructive for life and our ecology, right? We could do that. Or on the other side of the continuum, maximally contributing, the most valuable skill in terms of life, evolution, and the species. Another vector is what you enjoy doing, right? There are things that are valuable, that are needed by the species that we hate. If we really don't like something at all, we're not likely to have the passion to become excellent at it. Now, there are a number of things that are very useful for the species, and if one of them is something we love and enjoy, we're more likely to have the dedication to become excellent at that skill. So it's a good vector of approach. Another direction is something we are capable of doing. Right? There's some things that are just so far out there that we harm ourselves or others even attempting to bridge that enormous gap. And so something that is within the domain that is actionable. If you're if you're trying to be a pianist in an African village in a tribal village and you want to stay a part of that tribe, and the nearest piano is 1,000 miles away, it's not impossible by any means, right? But if there is something that you love that is useful, and that you can take steps to act on that, something that's actionable rather than inactionable, right? That obviously is ideal. So what is necessary? What do we love? What is actionable? I think that's a pretty good vector. Now, if we look at this first one here, what is the most useful for the species? Right? Well, let's consider that. The first part of looking at what is most useful for the species, what could have the most positive impact on both the ecology and the species over the next 100 years, it first of all makes sense to focus on an area, right? Because we can look at things that affect one person some of the time, right? That would be the one point of the continuum. We could also look at something that affects everyone a lot of the time, right? So where do we want to be on that continuum? Like if we could learn to contribute something that affects not one person some of the time, but a lot of people or everyone a lot of the time, we might pick, let's pick the thing that's going to affect a lot of people a lot of the time. And something, that has minimal impact to something that has maximal impact, right? So, so what are those? Like, what is the thing that affects everyone a lot of the time? And it turns out that culture, right, the root word of which is cult, that culture is the thing that affects everyone a lot of the time. Why? Well, culture is a default mode, right? It's the default mode network at an individual level, at a family level, at a community level, at a national level. It's the default. And the default, like if we look at a pie chart of human behavior, on any given day, there's about 5% of human behavior that is original, that is innovative, that is creative, like it's new that day. Or less, it may be 1 or 2%, right? But it's certainly not more than 5%. We look at all human behavior on a given day on the planet. 95% of it is default. You take an average person, what are you eating today? Well, they're eating whatever they're eating. Some people are eating hamburgers, some people are eating, spaghetti bolognese, whatever. Okay, so they're eating that. And then you ask them, is that something you eat regularly? Is that a default? Or is that something you're trying for the first time or, have never had before? And, it's 95% of the time, it's going to be a default. I always have a taco or a burrito for lunch. Every Friday, I do spaghetti bolognese, something like that, right? So it's in the default mode area of behavior. And what are you doing today? Well, I'm going to work. And is that a new job? Are you doing something you've never done before? No. I go to work like I always go to work at the same time I always go to work, and I do the same things that I've always done. And then you say, well, what are you thinking? What are you thinking about today, right? And I'm kind of wondering about what I'm going to do when I retire. And is that a new thought, or is that, no, I think about that, I've been thinking about that for years, right? And so it's in the default mode network of the brain. And what are you doing? Are you doing a job that has never been done before? No, I make pizza, right? And why do you make pizza? Well, because, there's lots of people that want to eat pizza, right? And why do they eat pizza? Well, they taste it at some point. It's part of the culture, right? So they eat pizza. And so every few days, this family orders some pizza. And I go in and I make pizza like this, and I do it like this, and I do that, right? 95% of all human thought, all human feeling, all human speaking, like what people are saying, what people are doing, and how people are being, are in the default mode network of the brain. They're doing things because that's how they've learned to do things. That's how they've been taught to do things. That's how they do things. And that's why they're doing that. And once something enters the default mode network in the brain or in the culture, it does not get critically re-examined very much. Less than 5% is critically re-examined on a regular basis. The idea of an 8-hour workday. How many times do you critically examine that? The idea that you should separate from your family to go to school, that you should separate from life to go to school. Like, life is happening, but you need to be separate from life in order to get an education to prepare to learn about life that we're separating you from. Right? So we're going to separate you from life to prepare you for life. How often does that idea get critically analyzed? Right? We're going to have the education centers be at a ratio of 1 teacher to 20 to 50 students. Why? And we're going to teach through listening and blackboards, or how often does that get re-examined? Right? Does it get compared to individual mentorships? Right? There's another way to say, to learn about and to prepare for life is you're going to find something you're excited about and that's useful in the community, and you're going to go and help one of the best people in the community that knows that skill. And in a couple of years, you'll know how to run that business and have that skill. And then if you want to learn something else, you'll go and mentor with somebody else. And you're going to have one-on-ones. So you're going to have lots of attention. And you don't have to have big buildings. And so we don't have to pay for big buildings. And they don't have to sit empty most of the time. We're going to do like this. So how often is the cult re-examined? The cult of the individual, the cult of the family, the cult of the education system, the cult of a country. And we're going to put criminals together with other criminals, and we're going to, like, if a criminal steals a $50 item, the public is going to pay $100,000 a year to punish that person. And they're going to learn, they're going to rehabilitate, right? They're going to learn how not to be a criminal by hanging around criminals, right? They're going to go to jail. So they cost the public $50, and we can't have that. So the public is going to spend $100,000 to punish that person for stealing $50. And they're going to spend all their time with other criminals, many of whom have committed more crimes more successfully than the person stealing the $50 item. And after a year, they're going to go back into the public, having learned what they've learned from other criminals and having cost the public $100,000. And then a certain percentage of them, having learned from other criminals how to commit better crimes, etc., are going to commit bigger crimes. And then they'll go back for 2 years, costing the public $200,000. And that's how we get justice in this cult. How many times does that get re-examined on a yearly basis? Any changes to that? Could we spend $50,000 a year rather than $100,000? Or is there a way to punish someone that doesn't cost the public any money? Or is there a way to rehabilitate someone that doesn't involve them hanging out with other criminals, for example? Like take a lazy person and send them out to a farm with hardworking people who aren't criminals, and after a year of making food for the community, then they get rehabilitated without costing the public anything. Like, is that a consideration up for discussion? Right? So we're going to do the jobs that are there, not because anyone thinks they're particularly good for humanity, but because they help these people make a lot of money at the expense of the ecology and at the expense of humanity. And we're going to call them successful because they made a lot of money while destroying the species and the ecology that we depend on. And that's what we do. We call those people a success because in our cult, success is measured by money because we are a capitalist cult and we identify with the image of capital, right? And so if you define yourself as a capitalist, then if you have more capital, you're successful at being a capitalist. If you have less money, you're failing at being a capitalist. But what about evaluating how much we want to identify with being a capitalist versus an ecologist or a well-beingist, right? That we are someone who is focused on the well-being of ourselves and other people, and we measure our success by how much well-being we experience and bring to other people. Like, is there any analysis about whether we are a well-beingist, an ecologist, or a capitalist, and what is good for the species, what is good for the individual, right? And we do science on the molecular structure of this alloy. But is there any analysis on whether or not the species is best served by understanding the molecular structure of this alloy versus an awareness of limited resources, right? That at any given moment we have a certain amount of time, a certain amount of money, a certain amount of natural resources, right? And so is there any critical analysis to say that the species, the planet, humanity would be better off knowing the structure of this metal versus knowing the structure of depression, right? Is there any analysis being done on the impact of eye gazing and depression? Right? If 10 people eye gaze for 20 minutes a day, and 10 people take antidepressants, and the antidepressants, you have to go and get the prescription, you have to pay a certain amount of money, there's a certain amount of side effects. And the eye gazing you can do with just about anyone, doesn't cost a penny, doesn't cost any natural resources, no side effects, other than perhaps intimacy. Is there any analysis on whether or not eye gazing has more or less impact than the antidepressant? Right? Is anyone interested in that? Right? If it turned out that hugging 3 people a day had more positive impact than taking antidepressants alone, would anyone be interested in that data? Is anyone studying it? Right? So the cult, the culture, the identity, the pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being that is operated by our default mode determines 95% of human behavior. Well, so if you change the cult design, you change the default pattern, you have 95% impact on 100% of the people who change the pattern, right? So if you knew, for example, that this pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being cost a lot of money, did a lot of ecological damage, and created chronic and unnecessary suffering for oneself and other people, and took a lot of time and effort to do. And this other pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being was free, meaning it didn't cost any money, took less time, did not consume any natural resources, or let's say 10 times less, and created massive amounts of well-being for ourselves, others, and our ecology. Would anyone want to know that detail, right? Is anyone interested? So there's one protocol that consumes a lot of energy to create large amounts of chronic and unnecessary suffering. And there's another protocol where the same people could think something, feel something, say something, do something, and behave and be in a certain way that creates large amounts of sustainable well-being. And all they have to do is, one, know that that is the case, right? Because we all know what the statistical impact is of what we're doing, right? The cult that we live in creates 70% loneliness, 20% depression, right? 1% homelessness, right? 5 to 10% poverty, right? 50% divorce, right? I'm not quite sure what the illiteracy statistics are. A certain amount of suicide, right? A certain amount of lying, cheating, and murder. So that's what this protocol generates as a probability field. So we already know that. But what if there was another way of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being that cost less money, that took less time, that was more fun to do, that was easier to do, that was well within all of our ability to do, that was good for the environment and that created large amounts of sustainable well-being for ourselves and other people. Would we be interested in knowing what that protocol looks like and how much more sustainable well-being would be created using that protocol of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being versus the one that we're doing, right? Now, in a capitalist cult, if someone rushes up to you, you're just about to buy a nice new Tesla, right? It's very safe. It's quiet. You don't have to breathe fumes. Your partner can't commit suicide in the garage with carbon monoxide poisoning, right? Your partner can, in fact, try and drive off a cliff, as one man did, trying to kill him and his entire family in a mass suicide, and fall 200 feet down the cliff, and nobody was hurt, right? So, so you want to buy a Tesla, right? And you're going to pay, $50,000 for that Tesla. Now, if someone rushes up to you and says, sir, don't buy that car. You can buy the exact same car for $5,000, 10 times less. All the benefits, right? But you save 10 times the money, right? It's only $5,000 over here. Are you interested in that detail? Well, as a good capitalist, right, that bows to the accumulation of capital, a penny saved is a penny earned, right? We are, of course, delighted. Oh my goodness, thank goodness I met you, right? This is really important information, right? I've got to go over here and save $45,000 and just buy this Tesla for $5,000, right? And if the word got out, oh my God, there's a place over here where you can buy $50,000 brand new Teslas for only $5,000, well, the phone would go off the hook, right? Quick, I want one, right? Reservations, emails, people, the line would be around the block, right? Quick, before the $5,000 Teslas are out, we've got to rush over there immediately, right? It's 2 a.m, doesn't matter, get up. There's a $5,000 Tesla. We're going down there and we're getting in line, right? So this is how the cult behaves, right? As capitalists, we bow to capital. We worship capital. And so the idea, right, a penny saved is a penny earned, of making all that money, $45,000, to buy a $50,000 Tesla for only $5,000, right? There'd be people coming into the state, right? I mean, people would fly in from other countries because we all understand worshiping capital, right? You snooze, you lose. Get out of bed, quick, get down to the sale, right? We all understand that, right? Because we worship capital. But we do not worship well-being, right? If someone says, quick, there's a 10 times better way to feel good today. Quick, get out of bed. No, I feeling good. It's not important, right? It's not important, right? Because we're capitalists. We're not well-beingists. But of course, there's faulty math, right? But we do not examine, because the definition of being a capitalist is in the default mode network, right? So it doesn't get examined either. Like, why are people capitalists instead of the other ists, right? Fascists, communists, whatever. Why are people capitalists? Why, right? Well, there's only one reason that anyone is anything in the end, and that is the promise that it will make us feel good and help us avoid feeling bad. In other words, the whole premise of every cult in history is this is the way to do things. You say, why, right? Well, because you'll be happier this way. You'll be so much better for you. This cult is working for you. These protocols are all for you. You've got to obey them. You've got to, because they're for you. Meaning you'll be better off if you do all these things. If you're a capitalist, you'll be better off than if you're not a capitalist, right? If you're this religion, you'll be better off than if you're those other religions. They all say that, by the way. So the underlying foundation of all cult behavior in human history is the promise, often false, that our way is the best way for you to be happy, to feel good and not to feel bad. This is the best thing. Here, have a hamburger. Well, I'd like to try some grasshoppers. You don't want to try grasshoppers? It's a terrible idea. Have you tried grasshoppers? No, it's a terrible idea. Well, they're high in protein. Well, no, have a bun, right? Do this. And cults do not like looking at statistical data because all cults are chronically inadequate at meeting the needs of all of their members. Right? You can find members in any cult in the world that they're homeless, they're lonely, they're addicted to things, they're shamed, they're not getting the help they need, they're feeling low self-esteem, etc. Right? And so their cult has failed them. Right? They did what they were told, and the priest molested them. They went to their parents and told the parents that this priest molested him. And the parents hit the child, right? And said, no, don't say that about the priest, right? And so the children thought they were crazy, right? And they were the bad ones. Then they'd go to the priest and listen to how they'd go to hell for, having homosexual sex. And the priest would ask them to suck their dick, right? So those members of the cult were messed up by the cult. They're not happy at all. They're scared, they're confused, they feel betrayed, they carry the shame that nobody believed them, this, that, the other, right? The Catholic, right, the Vatican covered it up, had a special branch to how to move pedophiles from one diocese to another so that the parents wouldn't catch on to the pedophilic priests, right? They all got together in conventions and gave each other tips on how to evade being caught, right? Denied it for decades. And eventually in the documentary Mea Culpa Maxima, you see the horror, right? The horror, the anger of this shame, etc., carried by young boys for a lifetime. The cult was not their friend, right? The cult was one of their worst enemies, right? And so the efficiency of a cult, the intelligence of a cult, can be measured by how many members of the cult are failed by the cult, are destroyed by the cult. Someone who commits suicide, by the way, is a cult failure. Meaning they succeeded at escaping the incompetence of their cult, right? Someone who commits suicide said, my cult is producing more pain in me than well-being. As a cult member, I don't know how to fix that with all of the education that I've received. Right? and no one around me knows how to fix it either. So it isn't fixed. So I'm surrounded by people who are unable or unwilling to reduce the amount of chronic and unnecessary suffering that the cult has given me. And it's so bad that my first plan, like my best plan that I can think of with all of my cult programming, surrounded by all my cult members, is to escape the torments and stupidity of my cult by killing my own body so that I don't have to be here. Right? That is a chronic, systemic cult disaster. It's saying the cult is not working for these people. And it's not working very well for the 1,000 people who think about suicide for everyone who does it. Right? So for every one person who commits suicide, there's 100 people who think about it seriously. And then there's 1,000 people who think about it from time to time, meaning life is so incompetent that they say, well, if this keeps getting on as bad as it is, I may just have to kill myself to escape, right? Because I'm surrounded by fools. If I was surrounded by intelligent people, well, then I would go to any one of them, right? And I'd say, I'm in massive amounts of pain, help me. And they would say, let's analyze your pain. So where is your pain coming from? Well, my girlfriend is cheating on me with my friend. Okay, 1 to 10, how painful is that? Well, that's a 9. Okay, my child doesn't respect me, and I don't know what to do about it. How painful is that? That's an 8. I'm getting, I don't know what to do with it, so I'm eating a lot, but I feel sick, so I don't really want to be in my body. That's a 6. And my boss does not want to hear about any of it, and I feel completely dehumanized because nobody around me wants to discuss this. That's a 7. And I have no real compelling reason to live, and that feels lonely and a bit empty. That's an 8. And I have no real friends. That's a 9. Right? Now, a competent person would, first of all, say, thank you so much for delivering the data we need, right? So what we're going to do, right, what we're going to do as competent members of an intelligent cult is we're going to go to your girlfriend, first of all, and we're going to give both of you couples therapy so that you know either to split up for good reasons, right? Or, why that? We're going to go to your friend and teach them friendship protocols. We're going to teach you how to find better friends. We're going to teach other friends how to be good friends with you, right? We're going to teach you how to be a better parent. We're going to teach your child how to show respect that you've earned, right? We're going to redesign the workplace so that there is space for important feelings like this, so that you don't actually have to die in order to not feel so lonely, right? So we're going to do this, we're going to do this, we're going to do this. And thank you so very much for helping us redesign a sick culture and illuminating our blind spots for us so that we can get to work and start creating a culture worth living in. Well, that's a competent member of a competent culture, because it would take an intelligent culture for that to be the normal response. You'd have to be very, very intelligent as a culture, at least more intelligent than we are, in order for someone to grasp that that is actually in everyone's interest, which it is, right? And then to start responding, to be responsible, for a culture to be responsible to its people, to its members, right? 95% of all cults in human history are dead. They're extinct. because they didn't serve their members adequately, right? But a really intelligent cult can beat those odds because everyone wants to belong to an intelligent network of people, right? Because they're capable of love and belonging, right? So, but a dumb cult cannot raise members, cannot produce members who are intelligent enough to know that they're dumb and what to do about it because they're dumb, right? A dumb cult cannot, right, doesn't have the imagination, the capacity to raise cult members who are intelligent enough to know that they're dumb and then intelligent enough to know what to do about it, and then self-loving and intelligent enough to then do those things about it so that the cult is transformed into something less dumb than it was before. Right now, of course, dumb members of an unintelligent cult can't follow that train of thought. That's just, it's too much, right? The paranoid default mode of most highly ignorant, highly sociopathic, highly self-destructive cults is that's different. Yes, it is, right? When you're behaving stupidly, and then you start behaving a little bit more intelligently, you're going to be different, right? And even a dumb cult member can grasp it. Yes, you're right. This is very different, right? Well, a fearful ignorant cult member is most frightened of the unknown. They're not frightened of the suicide rate. They're not frightened by 20% depression. They're not frightened by loneliness. They're not frightened by getting fat. They're not frightened by schizophrenia. No, they're frightened of doing something different. They're frightened of the unknown, right? And so the greatest crime, you're weird. Yes, that's another word for different, right? Now, your job as a cult member is to figure out if the difference is going in a positive direction from the status quo or in a negative direction. That's your job as a cult member, right? So someone is doing something in your cult that is different from the majority. Now, for evolution to happen, for growth to happen, for intelligence to increase, you have to do something different than what you were doing. There's no other way to do that, right? You have to be weird. You have to deviate from the norm. You have to be deviant relative to the norm. To be part of life, to grow, to evolve. You've got to do it. There's no other way, right? Now, your job, when you find a deviant, abnormal, weird, different human being, your one job, because they're doing their job to be different, right? You stay the same, everything dies, right? They're doing their job to experiment, to explore. But your job is to evaluate. Is that difference going forward or is it going backward? That's all you have to do. Now, the trouble with this evaluation is that it takes an intelligent person to know the answer to that. They've done studies. And the majority of people in any field are not highly competent. right? They're average, they're mediocre, they're medium, they're normal. The majority, and this is nothing new, by the way, there is no possibility of the majority not being the average, being medium, being mediocre. There's no mathematical possibility for the majority to be anything other than mediocre. Right? The trouble is that the majority, the mediocre, the average, do not have the intelligence to evaluate whether the deviants, the abnormal, are going forward or backwards. Right? They never have, they don't have, and it's possible they never will have that ability. Right? They do, however, have the ability to say that that's different. That's abnormal. Right? They don't have the ability to grasp that that is excellent news. Right? That the very first step in evolution is to deviate from the status quo. The very first step in growth is to deviate from the normal, from norms. That there is no way for life to get any better unless you deviate from the norm. So they do have the ability to assess and say, that's different, that's abnormal, right? Don't do that, that's different. They have that ability. But they don't have the ability to A, understand that is that if you care about life, if you care about evolution, if you want your cult to be part of the 5% of cults in human history that may be around in the next 10,000 years, right? Because cults are going extinct every single year on this planet. Languages die every month on this planet. The last person who speaks the language dies. They're going, cults are on the decline, meaning they did not succeed in serving their members well enough to flourish. Right? So 10,000 years into the future, will our cult be part of the 5% that remain or the 95% that go extinct? The biggest variable is deviation, deviance from what? From what is normal. Deviance from the norm is the first step in evolution. Now, it's also the first step in devolution. When you deviate from the norm, you go in one or the other direction. You either become more excellent at something or less excellent at something when you deviate from the norm, right? So the first step is deviation. The second step is it a good deviation or is it a bad deviation relative to our ideals, relative to our values? And because reality is vast and incredibly complex, it's not a simple answer, meaning we have to do experimentation, because if we don't do experimentation, then we risk the high probability that we did not understand all of the variables. And this is a great chance to talk about Andrew. Right? I knew Andrew some years ago, and he would watch TV with his wife and secretly seethe, right? He was a passive-aggressive, kind of feminine male who was, regularly being bullied and resenting his more masculine wife, right? And so he would just seethe and watch her TV shows, right? Now, she hated smoking, so he took up smoking. So he would go out for 2 or 3 hours at a time, 2 or 3 times a week, and have his one oasis, right? His one oasis was smoking cigars 2 or 3 hours at a time and several times a week. Now, the big distinguishing factor here was being separate from his wife because she hated smoking. The next thing was, what did he do when he was out there? Well, he cultivated male friendships, which could not flourish in proximity with his wife, right? So he cultivated male friendships with me and other men, right? He grew and processed feelings about himself, his marriage, etc., in those male friendships. He also meditated, visualized, and did that while he was outside. He also spent time reflecting in nature. He felt great. He felt liberated. His resentment for his wife calmed down. He laughed. He made jokes, and basically had the best time of his life while smoking cigars. Now, I point this out because if anyone had asked me, should I take up cigar smoking to improve my life? What? Smoke, not that great for your lungs, not that good for your teeth, costs some money. No, don't take up cigar smoking. But that whole reality pivoted, was built upon the habit of smoking. Now, then the question is, right, does having 3 male friends, does making jokes, does meditating, does programming, does looking at the stars, does having a break from a bullying wife offset the toxin in the lungs? And I think it did, right? So you can't look at, you have to experiment, right? You have to experiment, right? I remember an experiment that I was doing as, I was doing a year, I was doing all my bucket lists in 1 year. Basically, I gave myself $30,000 and a year to do as many things on my bucket list as I possibly could. And some of them were experimental. I didn't know if they would pay off. And the most experimental of all was buying a 60 mile per hour, 4-wheel drive, $600 radio control car. So it's kind of like a big wheel, one of those monster trucks, but just miniature. But it went 60 miles per hour, waterproof, 4-wheel drive. And I was really skeptical about this kind of, I'd done brainstorming on all the things that might work, right? Very, very, snobbish about this as a serious spiritual person, $600 for some toy, right? So, but, right, to be a good scientist, you have to experiment. You have to give things a chance. So I got the thing. I thought I should return this, right? This is going to be, I'm going to feel so dumb with this $600. But, you got to be a good scientist. So you opened the box, tried it out. And, it was, of course, way too violent and fast for being in the house. So I went out to the park for the first time, meaning I had no reason to go out to the park before. So I got to the park for the first time because I want to drive this truck around. So now I'm going and visiting the park. Second, I'm astounded at the response to this thing. Meaning, I have never seen people so enthusiastic about anything in my life as they are about this monster truck that goes 60 miles an hour. The kids are chasing it. The adults are interested. The men are interested. The wives of the men want to know where to buy it for their husbands. I have never, so now I'm interacting with the public in a way that I never have. I'm interacting with kids in a way that I never have. Now I'm going to this park. Now I'm going to that park. I'm bringing joy to this group of kids. 5 or 6 kids. I'll drive it slowly, and 5 or 6 kids, they'll try and chase it around whippets that they drive their owners nuts because whippets go 40 miles an hour, right? The owners can't exercise a whippet, right? This 60-year-old woman is holding the leash of this whippet dog, it's like this is a chore for her. Well, the whippet takes an interest in the truck. And she's all worried that it's going to, bite the truck or damage it. But this is a really tough truck. And the whippet can only go 40 miles an hour, but the truck can go 60 miles an hour. Right? So I'm steering the truck in front of the whippet and giving the whippet a workout. And the woman is so thrilled, right? So I start giving various dogs workouts, right? I'll go up to a dog with the car, the dog will sniff it off, the owner will let it off the leash, and I'll wear out all the community dogs chasing this truck. Now, I'm too limited in my mind, in my imagination, to figure out that any of this was possible, right? That was the thing I was most likely to cancel out, right? So being a grown man into heavy, serious topics and stuff like that, a radio-controlled truck, that's surely for a 12-year-old. Cigars, give me a break, dirty, nasty habit, right? No, right? Cigars saved this guy's marriage and doubled the value of his life because of the side effects. And a radio control car that goes 60 miles an hour brought me more exercise, more time in nature in the park, and more enthusiastic social engagement than writing books, right? I've written books about relationships that have had less impact than this radio control car, right? So we have to understand that when we deviate from the norm, and that's what that year was about for me, when we deviate from the norm, we lack the imagination to understand the full consequences of our actions, which is why we have to be disciplined in the willingness to experiment and disciplined in recording whether it worked or not. Buying that car might have been a dud. It wasn't. It was the beginning of buying other cars. Then I raced with other radio control people. I had interactions with people I'd never normally get to meet through the shared interest of racing radio control cars. Then I got into planes, right? So a whole world opened up because I used discipline to overcome my arrogance that this surely was not a good use of my time. Right? And, right? So the first step is to deviate from the norm. And the second step is to keep good records, to pay attention to, is that a good deviation or a bad deviation for reasons that may be obvious or they may be indirect, right? Cigar smoking was not good for my friend's lungs, but it was good for his marriage. It was good for his sense of humor. It was good for his health because he could laugh, right? Yes, they cost money, let's say $30 a week, but it saved him a ton of therapy by having 3 good male friends that talked things through while smoking cigars, right? So it actually saved him money, right? The laughter, the release, the growth, the excitement was more beneficial than the cost. But you had to try it, right? You had to try it in order to know that. And obviously, at some point, if you just chain smoked cigars, the cost benefit analysis would wear off, right? So, but these are cultural differences. Now, what a cultural designer does is they learn the probabilities. They first of all understand that everything can be improved, everything will be improved over time, and that by infusing any design with consciousness, any protocol with consciousness, you have an increased probability of iterating towards intelligence, towards well-being. Right? So if you understand that every cult in history, including our own, can be 10 times more intelligent than it is today, and you understand that that cult that could be 10 times more intelligent is dictating 95% of your behavior and 95% of the behavior of everyone around you. And you understand that your current cult, meaning if people continued doing exactly what they're doing now, right? More people will kill themselves, right? The air will be dirtier, the water will be dirtier, right? There'll be more loneliness, there'll be more broken marriages, there'll be more trauma, there'll be more crime. And if you do things differently, there will be less crime, less loneliness, less murder, less rape, more joy, more healing, more awareness, more empathy. If you understand that, and that the path between horrible and exceptional, or 10 times better, is framed, is created, the movement on the path comes from one skill, the skill of cultural design. Then you may say, well, why are we not learning cultural design in school? Why aren't we learning it in college? Why is nobody talking about it every day of the week? Why are we doing no cultural analysis based on data to say this is what we should and need to be doing because this is what these other cultures experience doing their way in this area, right? And so let's change our cult to adopt a best practice pioneered by another cult, right? Because every cult has done research in different areas. For example, in Finland, they've developed the cult, the science of sauna, right? So they're using that, ice dips and sauna, to dramatically improve their health in that area. We are not, right? So what would it take to have a community sauna, right? Somewhere with, a place that's always hot within 10 minutes of walking. How much would that cost? Like if 50 houses to 100 houses all shared the cost of one sauna based on the fact that it creates community, and each one put up $300, and now there was a sauna in every neighborhood, right? Or at least in this neighborhood, like, is $300 too much to create neighborliness, humor, community, intimacy, and increase our health by 10%? And maybe eat less because if you're going to be in a clothing optional sauna, you want to look a little better, right? So if that has that impact for a cost of $300 per family, is that the best use of that money, right? That's cultural design right there. And so if you want to do something you love, if you love people, if you want to do something that is desperately useful, there's another vector on here, and that is that it is rare, right? Picking up garbage is incredibly useful, but it's pretty common. There are garbage trucks in every cult, right? But cultural design is 100 times more potent in its impact than picking up garbage. And no one's doing it. No one is doing cultural design anywhere in the world. Right? There are millions of books written, just not on cultural design. There are tens of millions of videos on YouTube, just not on cultural design. There are education and workshops around the world, just not on cultural design. There is science in a million different specialized areas, just not on cultural design, right? So if you pick something that's incredibly rare, incredibly potent, has enormous impact, and nobody is doing it, right? It's the most valuable skill that no one is talking about, right? Now, what cultural design does, what it is, and we have to cover that because nobody is. What cultural design does is it takes a default, let's say education. You look at, okay, what's the thought process here? What's the feeling is here? What's the actions? What's the speaking? What's the way of being? How much money does it cost? How much time does it cost? How much natural resources are consumed in the whole education protocol per person? Okay. For example, in the United States, public education will cost the taxpayer $60,000. There'll be hundreds of acres in dedicated land, most of which is not used 95% of the time. You have buildings that sit empty, 16 hours a day and then are only used in certain things. You have equipment sitting idle. You have grounds, soccer fields that are used, 5 hours a week. You have an enormous amount of land dedicated to rare uses. And it takes, 15 years, whatever, it takes an enormous amount of time. We look at how much happiness comes from the parents, to the kids, how much the teachers are enjoying being in that system, right? And these are the inputs, right? So you have an input in time, you have an input in money, you have an input in natural resource, you have a protocol, and then you have an outcome in mental well-being, emotional well-being, physical well-being, financial well-being, social well-being, logistical well-being. These are the outputs. And you analyze all of the ways that these protocols could be done, and you do samples, right? You try 100 people on this one, 100 people on that one, 100, and you measure the inputs, you measure the outputs, and you report. Like an engineer adds a little bit of aluminum into the chrome mix and then does a stress test, right? So you bring in mentors rather than 1 to 20 student teachers, and you say, how is it for the mentor? How is it for this? And then you do stress tests, right? And you see, is the knowledge more sticky? Is it deeper? And is learning more fun? Is it not, right? You do an analysis on all 360 analysis on all parts of the system. And it is the designer's job to figure out the most intelligent, i.e. the most efficient way to generate sustainable well-being with a given set of protocols for a given input cost. And to report that data, and it is the job of the cult to respond to the data by doing subsequent tests and saying, let's do a proof of concept. And then to do something about that, right? If you learn that this way of learning costs 1/3 the money, creates 3 times more engagement, and is 5 times faster and more ecological than the status quo. You do a subsequent series of tests. If those are verified, then the entire system iterates towards what is the current best practice, knowing that there's always going to be a better practice and that the most intelligent function of any cult is to question itself and iterate, question itself and iterate. And that the speed of evolution, the speed of change determines the viability of the cult over time, as well as the intelligence of its cult members. That is what a cultural designer does. That is what cultural design is. You can do it on your own life. You can do it in your marriage. You can do it as a company owner. You can do it as a community. You can do it as a neighborhood. You can do it as a church. You can do it as a nonprofit. You can do it as microcultures. There needs to be 1,000 microcultures around the world with different themes and different protocols, each one measuring their inputs and outputs and publishing that data, right, so that it can be peer-reviewed and tested, right? Can it be duplicated? If you take another 100 group of people and do the same protocols as this, can they get the same result? And if they can, and it's 10 times better for the environment, for health, for human well-being, right? That is a home run, right? That's evolution. That's saying that our species may be one of the 1% of species over the next million years, over the next billion years, that makes it. Because 99% of all life forms that have ever been on this planet are dead. And in another billion or so years, 99% of all the life forms on this planet, all of are going to be extinct and or dramatically iterated. And it will be the species that are most sustainable and most efficient and rapid at iterating change that will be around in a few billion years. Now, life doesn't care which species wins, right? But our great-great-grandchildren do care whether we set them up to be a winner or whether we go extinct. And that makes cultural design the most important, ignored, blocked, blind-spotted skill that everyone needs desperately and nobody is practicing.